iHeart and on the WHPC app.
90.3 WHPC.
1, 2, 3, 4.
This is Good Morning, everybody. This is Jewish Talk coming to you live from Nassau Community College on 90.3 WHPC. We are also streaming on the nccradio.org. That's our internet address. This program is later archived on Spreaker.com, Spreaker.com. This program is repeated on Sundays at 11 p.m. So if you're looking at your clock right now and you're watching, you see it's already 8 a.m., well, you're actually listening to it in the morning. If it's 11 p.m., you're in the middle of the night. What are you doing? So hi there, my name is Rabbi Perl. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This all depends. And when you are listening or watching, oy Gewalt, how could I forget? We can be seen on right now as we say hello to Holly Feynman and to Zalman Weg. We want to say that we can be seen on WHPC's Facebook Live page as well as my own at Anshul Pearl. So good morning, everybody. And so let's, as I do my weekly mantra, hello on the radio, hello online, and hello to the world. My goodness, I want to wish everybody a wonderful weekend. You know that if I catch anybody on Tuesday working, you're doing something really wrong. It's July 4th. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well today. And we want to say hello to Dr. Kilshevsky all the way from Vermont, where Golan, Matan, and Zev are listening. Fantastic. And Jeannie Marie has also joined us today. So let's get right into it. I want to talk a little bit about an interesting subject and then talk about, sadly, and I would say, you know, I don't like to talk this way, but is there a certain, are we losing our moral values today? You know, what's going on? And I will share with you some of the Gallup polls, how people are thinking these days in reference to, in general, society around us. Before we do that, let's begin with this topic. The topic is, don't ruin your life by trying to understand it. Gaval, what am I talking about? And Linda joins us today. Good morning, Linda Zellickson. Thank you. Good Vach and good morgen. Well, only yesterday we discussed in the Torah portion, as you may know, many people ask me, Rabbi, what are you talking about? I just want to remind everybody in the Jewish tradition, every Saturday in the morning, there's a lengthy learning, studied, read from the Torah itself, with music, with the tunes called the trop, and the reading of it properly, and it's the actual reading of the Torah portion each week. We prepare for this on Monday and Thursday, prior to that, by just reading a section. But on Shabbos, we actually call up 10 persons, and the Torah portion is read. And so in the course of the year, we're approximately covering over 50 Torah portions. So yesterday, one amongst the many subjects, it was a double portion, Chukas Balak. And yesterday we were instructed about what is known as the Parah Aduma, a red cow without blemish, which has no defects, no yoke had ever been laid on it. That means it never worked the fields. And this was a very specific commandment that is called Zois Chukas HaTorah, which means this is a particular mitzvah that the nations of the world, taunt the Jewish Israel by saying, what is this commandment? What's the reason for this? For it talks about taking the red heifer, turning it into ashes, mixing it with water, sprinkling on somebody who is impure to become pure, etc. But the Torah introduces it as the Zois Chukas HaTorah. This is a term used implying it is enactment before me, you have no right to criticize it. Chok means it's beyond understanding. And that's what we want to talk about. When a person doesn't understand something in life, is it always so helpful and really appropriate to always want to know the reasons why? It sounds like a cop-out to say that you can't question on the mitzvah of the red cow. When our parents and teachers made a rule, and it made no sense, and we asked a good question refuting it, what do they always say? I'm your teacher, I'm your parent, I'm the one in charge, and you have no business in questioning these rules. Come on, give me a break. If you just made up a ridiculous rule, admit it and move on. Everyone can get away with murder or stupidity by saying you have no right to ask questions. That's what dictators do. So this is our question. We talk about a particular mitzvah that is under that category, chuk. It's something that we don't ask questions. It's one of those statutes. But actually, the original Hebrew expression means something very different. If the Torah wanted to say you have no permission to think about this, it should have used the common term, it is forbidden to contemplate this law. And for those who speak Hebrew, it would sound like this, asur laharer achareo. The Hebrew word used in reference to this is not asur laharer, but it ein lecho reshus laharer achareo, which means something else. You do not have the domain, reshus means domain. You are not in the domain to be able to contemplate it. It does not mean that you have no right to question it. It means that it is not within your domain to contemplate, to think about this. As we colloquially say, it's not in your wheelhouse. It would be like trying to explain art. Let's say I went to Sybil Triggerbuff, and she's going to try to explain to me what art is through mathematics or poetry, through the regular laws of writing an article, or the paradoxes of quantum mechanics through conventional logic, or trying to see music with your eyes, or hear art with your ears. Eyes are wonderful, but you know what? You need a different tool set to experience music. Ears are amazing, but you need different instruments to experience art. If my relationship to this particular mitzvah is with pure rational logic, I missed the point. It would be like telling your wife, I do not see the logic in you enjoying roses that will soon die. Or, I do not understand why you are bothered by this experience. It is not logical. If I was to say that, I'm missing the point. A relationship is not all about logic. It is about connection. It's about attachment. It's about loyalty. It's about trust. So are my deepest desires logical? Are my deepest yearnings logical? Sometimes yes, and sometimes not. They are me. A therapist once shared with me a profound truth. As long as the patient explains to me why he is feeling the way he is feeling, I know we will not, hit the spot. He is still in the controlled realm of logic. Only when I ask him, why does this bother you? And he or she sheds a tear and says, because this is who I am, I know I hit the spot. Healing begins. So the Torah says, these particular mitzvahs and experiencing belong to another domain. To stand in the domain of logic and say, this does not make sense to me, is like watching someone crying and saying, logically, I do not see a reason for tears. Now you sound like artificial intelligence, not like a human being who has a soul. It's like me watching a mother hugging and embracing a child for a long time and asking, what's the logic to do this for so long? So these mitzvahs, particularly this red heifer, belongs to the category of what we would call a hug from God, a divine embrace. God's expressing his innermost passions and desires, so to speak, and it touches us in a deeper place, in our own divine, sensitive, sacred core. Yes, it's not all about cold logic, structural reasons, mathematical equations. It's about opening ourselves to our deepest vulnerabilities and truths. The more we let go of our preconceptions, of our need to control and understand, the more we can taste the divine pure flavor in these mitzvahs. This is how the Lubavitcher Rebbe, explains the meaning of the Medrash, that Moses did not comprehend the tam, the reason or flavor of the mitzvah of the red cow. But if it is a chok, what exactly did he understand? Moses was fully and absolutely aligned. He can feel and experience the divine reality, so he can fully grasp with every fiber of his being the mitzvah of the red heifer, not because he was smarter and more intellectual, but because his soul was open to the vibrations of the divine reality. He can experience in his core the divine desire. And on some level, it relates to each of us as well. There are situations in life where if we use our brain, we fail miserably. Not because our brain is a bad thing, God forbid. The brain is precious and must be employed to its maximum. But because some realities in life are beyond the domain of intellectual understanding. They belong to a different realm. Trying to wrap our brain around them is trying to taste cheesecake with brain. It is, to employ a metaphor used by Heisenberg, it's like catching a fish that is 2 inches long with a net that has holes of 3 inches long. So my net needs to be changed. If my spouse is experiencing pain, if my child is experiencing pain, if I'm experiencing pain, trying to intellectualize it will spell disaster. When my life is being challenged in deep ways, it is time to discover the power of presence, of empathy, of breath, of connection. It is a chok, something beyond my brain's capacity. I need to open myself up to the mysteries of life, with compassion, with faith, with surrendering to a reality which is far beyond my limited brain, without the need to figure it out and know how it will work out. So, dear friends, much of life is a mystery, and the way to celebrate it is not via rational understanding, but by cultivating other skills and tools. So relationships, love, attachment, trust, faith, connection, vulnerability, humility, integrity, authenticity, and opening up ourselves to the infinity of God, which can't be compressed into any mold we might form in our brain cortex. This is just a little introduction, my friends, of appreciating how to look at things. And not always do we have to understand, or it has to make absolute, intellectual perfection. It's no coincidence that yesterday's Jewish date was the 12th day of Tammuz. And what we read about, this discussion about the red heifer. Think about this. Give me a few minutes, dear friends, to share with you. You all know. I want to say hello to Amy Goodman Wool, tasting cheesecake with brain. That's a brilliant example. Thank you so much, Amy. Where did you hear that? The world last week was gripped during the last week by the Wagner Group, as its atrocities around the world have been publicized, and its declaring a rebellion against Putin, threatening to march on Moscow, has caught everybody by surprise. Now, we all know the owner of the Wagner private military contractor. His name is Prigozhin, and he escalated his direct challenge to the Kremlin. As we all know, he called for an armed rebellion aimed at ousting Russia's defense minister. His army of 25,000 men captured the city of Rostov on the Don River. That's, by the way, a very important city in Chabad world, because that's where the 5th and 6th Rebbe of Chabad, the Rebbe Rashab and the Rebbe Rayatz, lived from 1915 until 1924. Okay, I'm not here to give you news, We all know Putin's response. He called it a treason. In any case, for now, the Wagner Group stopped its official mutiny against the Putin's regime. The Wagner Group began its operations in 2014 during the war in eastern Ukraine, and many of its members are actually former Russian military personnel. You'll soon see, my friends, why I'm spending this time talking about this. Because we're going to share with you how you can look at something one way, but if you look at something the way I've just explained in a more deeper sense, it actually makes sense. So he has his private military and has been involved in all kinds of mercenary work in Syria and Libya and whatever. In July of 2018, we know that 3 journalists investigating the activities of this Wagner Group in Central Africa were killed in an ambush. There's a whole history about this individual, this Prigozhin. He lost his father when he was only a year old. His father was adopted, and in the 1980s he was sent to prison. Agansa Maisa. And with the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1990, he was released from prison after serving 9 years. In the turmoil of the 1990s, he established a very successful hot dog stand, and his business expanded. Then he turned into a restaurant business. He opened up a high-end restaurant in St. Petersburg. I've never been there. It's frequented by wealthy and celebrity customers. And that's how he met Putin, and he transitioned. He opened up a catering business. As a whole story, he became nicknamed as Putin's chef. Russian media describes him as a billionaire with enormous wealth that he acquired through government contracts. And today he's the owner of this very powerful military Wagner Group, which many say was named after the composer Richard Wagner, Hitler's favorite, Yamach Shemai, due to its neo-Nazi elements in this group. This all demonstrates to us how insane the situation in Russia is even in the year 2023. It only allows me to appreciate the story that occurred in Russia 1 century ago. If there was ever a battle fought in vain, this was it. Or at least so it seems at the time. I take you back to the year 1924. Vladimir Lenin, the father of the communist revolution, is dead. Over 900,000 people passed through the Hall of Columns during the 4 days and nights that Lenin's body lay exposed to the public. Then came Joseph Stalin, Yamach Shemai, succeeds him as the new leader of the Soviet Union. During the following 30 years, he would murder 50 million of his own people. Jews and Judaism would be one of his primary targets. He sets up a special government organization, Yesvetskia, to ensure that the Russian Jewry in its millions embraces the new ethos of communism, introducing a paradise constructed of bullets and gulags. Stalin would rule with an iron fist until his death in the March of 1953, where 4 million people would gather in Red Square to bid farewell to the tyrant, still revered and beloved by much of the nation and by many millions the world over. At his home in Leningrad, today Petersburg, there was a 44-year-old man whose name was Rabbi Yosef Yitzhak Schneerson, the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe. He assumes the responsibility for the survival of Judaism in the communist Soviet Union, to ensure that Jewish life and faith would survive the hellish darkness of Stalin's regime. The Rebbe sends out emissaries to the entire country. He creates an underground network of Jewish activity, which includes Jewish schools, synagogues, ritual baths, also known as mikvot, adult Torah education, academies for Torah learning for students, Jewish textbooks, providing rabbis for communities, teachers for schools. And over the 1920s and 1930s, the Rebbe built 600 Jewish underground schools throughout the USSR. Many of them lasted only for a few weeks or months. When the KGB, that's the secret Russian police, discovered a school, the children were expelled, the teacher was arrested. A new one was opened up elsewhere, usually in a cellar or on a roof. It sure seemed like a lost battle. Here was an individual rabbi, the sixth Lubavitcher Rebbe, with a small group of pupils, staging an underground rebellion against a mighty empire that numbered in the hundreds of millions and aspired to dominate the world. It was like an infant wrestling with a giant, an ant attempting to defeat a military tank. The situation was hopeless. The Wagner Group that I've been talking about, with 25,000 tough men who do not shy away from terror, violence, and cruelty, can't easily defeat Putin. But lahavdil, one Rebbe who commands no military is supposed to take down Stalin. This was what's going on. Finally, in 1927, 96 years ago, the Soviets lost their patience with this man. The Rebbe behind the counter-revolutionary work was arrested and sentenced to death by a firing squad. With foreign pressure and nothing less than the miracle, convinced the KGB to alter the sentence to 10 years in exile. It was then converted to 5 years, and then to 3 years, and then quite unbelievably in the Soviet regime, where clergy and laymen alike were murdered like flies, he was completely exonerated. And so, the 12th and the 13th day of the Hebrew month of Tammuz, yesterday was the 12th, and today is the 13th. So that's where we're talking about it today. Yesterday and today marks the 96th anniversary since he was liberated. The previous Rebbe was liberated from Stalin's death sentence in 1927. But our question here this morning is, what was the Lubavitcher Rebbe thinking when he ran this entire operation? Did he not know this is abnormal, insane? There's no way he will succeed. It's irrational. Stalin killed people with more ease than you kill a fly. Stalin killed more people than Hitler. Yamach Shemam. The entire thing did not make sense. Just stay put and do your own thing. In fact, cynics scoffed at him. Close friends told him he was making a tragic mistake. Even many of his religious colleagues were convinced that he was wasting his time and energy fighting an impossible war. They either fled the country or maintained a low profile. Some great rabbis at the time felt he was trying to do something impossible, that it was futile. What indeed went through the previous Rebbe's head? His son-in-law, our Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, addressed this issue in 1975. That gives us perspective on what the previous Rebbe was living through, and also provides us with a very relevant principle and attitude that all of us can have as well. You see, this is how the Rebbe explained it. The Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, did not know how exactly it would work out in the end. Perhaps he did not know if he would survive, nor did he understand how he could succeed. Rationally, it did not make sense. But at that moment in history, he experienced what I discussed earlier on, the relationship of a chok. Life does not need to always be understood. Not everything has to fit into the box of rationality. It needs to be lived according to one's calling. He knew his mission in life was to sow seeds, though the trees were being felled one by one. God had sent him down to this world, and he became the spiritual leader of Russian Jewry. His job was to ensure that hundreds of thousands of Jewish children are not torn away from Torah and Judaism. He said to himself, the Rebbe explained, I do not get this. I do not have to get this. This does not work with plain logic. That is fine. Truth does not need to be limited into a mold of logic. If this is my calling, I am in. Hineni, I'm here. Who won, my friends? But wait, more than 90 decades have passed, and we can gain some perspective. Was the Rebbe right? Who won? Stalin or Schneerson? 100 years ago, Marx's socialism and Lenin's communism heralded a new era for humanity. Its seemingly endless power and brutality seemed unbreakable. Yet one individual stood up, a man who would not allow the awesome war machine of Mother Russia to blur his vision, to eclipse his clarity. In the depths of his soul, he was aware that history had an undercurrent often invisible to most, but discernible to students of the long and dramatic narrative of our people. He knew with full conviction that evil might thrive, but it will die. Yet goodness, holiness, godliness, embodied in Torah and mitzvahs, are eternal. And guess what? The previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, whose day of liberation we celebrate today, he chose to invest in eternity. He chose to embrace his divine mission. To me, that's an amazing lesson. What do we look forward in our life? To invest in what? To learn that the best investment is everything that we do should have an eternity. To embrace our own divine mission. So here we are, 90 years later, this giant and what he represented emerged triumphant. Today, despite the uneasy times in Russia, despite Putin losing the plot, so to speak, and an uncertain future, in the republics of the former Soviet Union stands hundreds of synagogues, Jewish day schools, yeshivas, mikvaot, Jewish community centers. Since communism fell, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the son-in-law of the sixth Rebbe, who was liberated on these days in 1927, has sent hundreds of ambassadors to create a Jewish renaissance. They span the entire length and the breadth of the country, from Siberia to Tashkent, from Tbilisi to other areas of Krasnoyarsk. Over the last 30 years, they have built more than 100 full-time Jewish schools in which more than 100,000 Jewish children receive a Jewish Torah education. As this summer season begins, dozens of Jewish day camps have opened up throughout the former Soviet Union, with tens of thousands of Jewish children who will enjoy a blissful summer coupled with the celebration of Jewish life. Let me just give you one example. Rabbi Yerachmiel Garelik, he serves as the Chabad ambassador to Western Siberia. Jewish women had to travel for 7 hours to visit a mikveh. He just completed a beautiful, magnificent mikveh in Tuman, a place in Siberia. And the Chabad couple in another place called Birobidzhan, located on the Trans-Siberian Railway near the China-Russian border, where Stalin wanted to exile 3 million Russian Jews, he has just opened a glatt kosher restaurant there. Last Hanukkah, a large menorah stood tall in the Kremlin, casting a glow of Hanukkah on the grounds where Stalin walked. On Lag BaOmer, another Jewish holiday, thousands of Jewish children with kippot on their heads marched the streets of Moscow with signs proclaiming Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Hear, O Israel, and concluding with the words, God is one. Jewish life is bustling in Russia, in Belarus, Ukraine, Lithuania, Uzbekistan. Visiting Russia last summer, Russia's chief rabbi, Rabbi Perl, who, by the way, when he was much younger, was one of the first students who came to help us here on Long Island for our famous children's matzah bakery, pointed to a massive Jewish school he has built in Moscow, stretching over a full block. Right across from here, he would always point out some of the main offices of the KGB, where the orders to decimate Judaism came from, now stands a huge Jewish school. Another 2 streets over is called the Marina Rashtra Synagogue in Moscow. There's a massive, beautiful 8-story structure. Hundreds of Jewish persons pray and study each day. So, my friends, comrade, Tavarish Stalin is dead. Communism has faded away as hopelessly irrelevant and destructive. The sun of the nations is today a clod of darkness. The ideology of the Soviet Empire, which declared Lenin has not died and Stalin will not die, he is eternal, is now a mockery. Stalin and Lenin are as dead as one can be, but the mikveh, built by the Lubavitcher Rebbe in 1927, they are still there, from Siberia to Moscow to Tashkent. So if you visit Russia on this Shabbos, I'm not sure if you will find anybody celebrating the life and the vision of Stalin or Khrushchev or Brezhnev or Andropov, but I will tell you what is going on, my friends. You will find tens of thousands of Jewish persons celebrating the liberation of the Lubavitcher Rebbe in 1927 on this very date. Today, yesterday was the 12th, and today the 13th day of Tammuz. And the narrative of one holy man's triumph over one of the greatest mass murderers in human history, sharing his vision, committing themselves to continuing saturating the world with the light of Torah and mitzvahs. So, on this Sunday, this Shabbos and Sunday, the 12th and the 13th day of Tammuz, let's lift up our glasses and say L'chaim. L'chaim to a Rebbe who inspired such heroism in so many disciples, many of them who paid the ultimate price. L'chaim to the incredible Jews of Russia who maintained the embers burning for 7 decades, and then when the opportunity came, fanned them into glowing flames. L'chaim to Hashem, to Yiddishkeit, and to Am Yisrael. Today we have many battles to fight and plenty of darkness to conquer. It is easy to become cynical or depressed, leading to emotional paralysis. But our greatest leaders always knew better. They never allowed the mask of evil to define the narrative of history. They ensured that another story would dominate our imaginations and actions. And so I say to myself and to you, dear friends, so can we. But for this, we need to cultivate the mindset of a chok. When curveballs come our way, and let's not try to always understand everything, because then we are depriving ourselves of a golden opportunity to build a relationship between our core super-rational essence and with the core of God. Let's not ruin our life by trying to understand it. I want to say good morning to Susan Ferenzi. Fantastic. Good morning to you and to Lavana. Shavua Tov. Today, this weekend, these next few days, people will be having barbecues and bonfires and having a good time. And certainly, we wish everybody an enjoyable, safe week, wonderful weekend. There's an adage, there's a saying, where there's smoke, there's fire, is more than just a metaphor. According to Jewish law, the liability for damages caused by a fire usually include the damages caused by the smoke as well. And that is my little conversation now. Can my neighbor make me move my barbecue, or bonfire. If you intentionally or negligently light a fire that could be spread by a normal breeze, you are liable for damages and its smoke causes if the fire spreads to the property of another. So what happens when we're talking about a smoky barbecue or bonfire? I know people have moved to Vermont. They've moved out of state so they can make a big bonfire and it won't bother their neighbor. So what happens when we're talking about a smoky barbecue or bonfire, which does not actually burn your neighbor's property, but can potentially wreak havoc through smoke and odor? And we have this issue in Mineola as well, that comes from, local restaurants, and it's stinkt, and it's smoky, and at certain points, you're walking through like a haze of this smoke that perpetrates and permeates the entire street. According to Jewish law, if you want to do something on your own property that may damage your neighbor's property, you need to make sure to distance it from their property. For example, the fire in an old-fashioned oven should be at least 4 handbreadths away from a shared wall to prevent the wall from heating up. Generally, if you begin such an activity and your neighbor demonstrates that they don't mind, for example, if they help you install the oven close to the shared wall, they may not object at a later date. The fundamental principle here is that one has the right to continue an activity once it has been established. How about smoky cooking? The sages tell us that steady smoke produced by bakeries and workshops is different. You can never establish a precedent to habitually emit a significant amount of smoke into another person's space, even if they were silent for years. This is because it is so disruptive that no one would stomach it. Therefore, the only way that a person could forego their right to protest regular smoke is by making a kinyan, an act of acquisition, formally waiving their right. But the law regarding individuals who only produce smoke occasionally is different. So if you had a few cookouts and your neighbor never protested, you can assume that they're waiving their rights to future objections. Furthermore, some even say that the neighbors can't even protest it to begin with. However, in the Code of Jewish Law, seems to rule, according to the opinion, that one can indeed protest it initially. In the course of learning these laws, we glean a fascinating insight into how much our standards of living have changed. The Code of Jewish Law differentiates between smoke that can cause injury and smoke that merely may cause property damage, stating that even if the smoke reaches the neighbor's house and darkens the wall, if the neighbor saw it and remained silent, we assume they forgive the neighbor and cannot subsequently object. This statement may seem extreme to us, for who can be expected to sit on their hands while their home is being blackened by smoke? Indeed, contemporary commentators explain that this halacha, this law, originated during a time when the smoke damage was common in homes. Drab wall colors were often chosen to mask the soot and the dust that would inevitably accumulate. However, in today's world, where a smoke-blackened wall is not the norm, this is considered major damage. One can hold their neighbor liable and protest the smoke-causing fires at any point. So what's the bottom line? In some ways, smoke is considered more damaging than other nuisances, and one can never establish the right to engage in these activities that will blow steady smoke into someone else's property. On the other hand, when it comes to something relatively harmless like a pungent barbecue, if you have already been grilling for a number of weeks without anyone protesting, then you've established a precedent and may continue to do so. Still, it's important to be considerate, my friends. Of course, this rule generally applies to healthy neighbors who just don't like the smell. In cases of illness, of course, extreme sensitivity, or actual property damage, the ruling, of course, would be different. So, dear friends, I know that many of you were concerned about making a barbecue and worrying about your neighbor next door and all the smell and everything else going up there. But, dear friends, now you can rest assured and enjoy your barbecues. Here's a question that came our way. We make a blessing before eating food, when inhaling a fragrant aroma, like the psalmim on Saturday nights, upon seeing some wondrous, such as a rainbow. So why is there no blessings for beautiful music, hearing? Like, why isn't there a blessing to make every time I get on the air here? Ha, ha, ha. Kim is laughing all the way to the bank. There are several classes of blessings, each with their own set of parameters. There are blessings we make in response to an awesomeness of God's natural world, which is the closest we can get to even an inkling of just how magnificent God himself is. This includes seeing natural wonders such as the mountain ranges and oceans, or experiencing the magnitude of an earthquake or lightning strike, as well as the sound of crashing thunder. So there is a blessing to be said over sounds, but it is limited to natural sounds like thunder and excludes man-made sounds like music or plain hot air when the rabbi speaks. There's another class of blessings which we say before pleasurable experience. This includes the blessings over foods and aromas, both of which enter into our bodies and sustain us. This does not, however, include that which we experience through sight, like a bright light, sound, music, or feeling, a refreshing swim or a cool breeze, all of which remain external. There are also blessings said to praise God for pleasures of reaching a milestone or an experience, such as a birth of a child or purchasing of a new home. Listening to fine music would not fall under this category either, since it is not tied to a specific event. So I know this has been bothering many people, and they were wondering and questioning. I hope this clears it up once and for all, that you do not need to make a blessing for my weekly show or any music. I also want to remind everyone this coming Thursday, July 6th through July 27th, begins what is known as the 3 weeks. This is in the Jewish calendar an annual mourning period that always falls out in the summer. This is when we mourn the destruction of the Holy Temple and our launch into the still ongoing exile. With an eye to the future, throughout these 3 weeks, we also learn about the third temple, which is yet to be built. The period begins on this Thursday with a fast day. This is the 17th day of the Hebrew month of Tammuz. This fast day that marks the day when the walls of Jerusalem were breached by the Romans in 69 CE. It reaches its climax and concludes with another fast on the 9th of Av, which this year will be July the 27th, the date when both temples were set aflame. This is the saddest day of the Jewish calendar, and is also a date that many other tragedies befell us. My friends, I'd like to move on to another interesting topic, and here's the question. Dear friends, please sit down if you are standing. Being overweight in a world full of hunger. And the question is it ethical to be fat when there are so many hungry people in the world? I know that my weight loss doesn't translate directly into food for the hungry, but I do feel kind of guilty about the contrast, asks an individual. And the answer in part, is like this. It's saddening to me to encounter this question because I view it partially as an extension of society's current obsession with health and body image. Obviously, it is healthier to eat in moderation, but overeating is a relatively harmless indulgence and certainly not unethical. Some of our greatest sages were fat. The Talmud relates. I hope Dr. Kolshevsky knows this Talmud very well. The Talmud relates that Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Rabbi Shimon, had such large stomachs that when they met, a team of oxen could pass between them without touching them. And our commentators point out that the Talmud mentions this and other, extremes of our great rabbis specifically so as not to shame other people who have these characteristics. It is true that we should be sensitive not to overindulge in the actual presence of those who are deprived. In earlier times, it was even customary to give the waiter a little bit of each delicacy he serves as not to deprive him. So great is the importance of this principle that Jewish law tells us that whenever possible, we should not even eat in the presence of a dead person. There's also other restrictions which our sages placed on us. For example, when we go to a cemetery, we are considerate of those who are buried there who cannot do a mitzvah. And therefore, we're careful to hide our tzitzis. Those who wear the tzitzis under their shirt hide the tzitzis themselves in their pockets so that not to, kind of in your face. There are other restrictions which our sages placed on us, even in private, in actual times of famine and shortage. But that doesn't mean that any time there are deprived individuals anywhere, it is forbidden for us to enjoy the pleasures of life. We need to exercise appropriate concern for the needy, and in any case of excessive indulgence is counterproductive. But there's nothing unethical about eating more than is needed for sustaining life. Of course, Judaism advocates moderation, not abstinence, and most overweight people are not living a life of conspicuous excess. It is certainly praiseworthy to eat in moderation, and the Talmud tells us that ideally we should eat and drink only 2/3 of fullness. But I wonder about a society, this is something to think about. I wonder about a society where people ask if it is unethical to engage in the excess of eating, which is in itself a constructive activity, but no one asks if it is unethical to engage in the excess of television watching or other activities that endanger our spiritual health, much more than overeating endangers our physical health. So, the being overweight in the world, you now have an insight to what we're talking about. The other issue that I wanted to bring up, my friends, is this idea of where are we holding in the world? Where are we holding this world in society as well? It pains me a little bit as we come to July 4th, Americans' independence. I took some time last night to go back and to learn more about the American history, what brought about the American independence, and the source of the Constitution and many things. I'm saying this quietly so that no one can hear me. Is America in a state of moral decline? This is not just my feeling. It's actually an assessment of the majority of Americans. According to the Gallup polls, not only are Americans feeling grim about the current state of moral values in the nation, but they are also mostly pessimistic about the future on the subject. As 78% say morals are getting worse, and just 18% say it's getting better. Let's talk open, my friends. Moral decline can be seen in the deterioration in civility, the increase in litigations, the lack of integrity, out of wedlock births, the breakup of families, vulgarity, promiscuity, immodesty. As quickly as we have progressed technologically, medically, scientifically, morally, dirty word, morally, we are rapidly going backwards, confused about basic fundamental values and institutions that much more primitive people understood clearly. Perhaps this decline can be explained by another recent Gallup poll that reported that belief in God in the United States amongst adults has reached a new low. Belief in God provides a moral anchor and a moral compass with rules and regulations from an objective and absolute source of truth and decency. A breakdown of faith breeds relativism. I know I'm going to be corrected by my good friend Michael, but breakdown of faith breeds relativism, a subjective interpretation of what is right and what is wrong. When morality is determined by popular opinion instead of objective truth, by needing to be compatible with comfort and convenience rather than mission and service, by the pursuit of pleasure and happiness rather than sanctity and holiness, my friends, the result is moral decline. It is morally regressive environment. It is understandably tempting for us in our community to turn inward, to focus on protecting ourselves and our families from the increasing dangers of shifting sands around us. And to a certain degree we must. And remind ourselves and the people around us, our children, our family, our communities, how careful we must be not to be sucked into all the stuff that's going on today. However, we must also rise in this moment to turn outwards. This is my point, my friends. As I say hello to Jeannie Branston and Cheryl Varon Kowarski for your wonderful points. We must also rise and turn outwards. As much as we must turn inwards, we must not forget the outside. Because, let's be honest, we have something that has ever intention to be shared with the world. Of course, we don't believe in proselytizing in the sense of recruiting non-Jewish people. Oh my goodness, I just got a wonderful note from Rosemary Hoffman. Unbelievable. Thank you so much, Rosemary. So we certainly don't believe in proselytizing in the sense of recruiting anybody to convert to Judaism. At the same time, we fervently believe in promoting not to be bashful, to be proud of Torah truths, of values, of ideals, to share it with the world. That has been our mission since our inception, and one shudders to consider what the world would look like if we were to always remain entirely insular, only worrying about ourselves. Fascinating. I want to share with you, I found this, consider this letter written in 1806 by John Adams. Second, I'm not talking about Sam Adams, I'm talking about John Adams, the second U.S. president. These are his words. I will insist that the Hebrews have done more to civilize men than any other nation. If I were an atheist and believed in blind eternal faith, I should still believe that fate had ordained the Jews to be the most essential instrument for civilizing the nations. If I were an atheist of another sect who believe or pretend to believe that all is ordered by chance, I should believe that chance has ordered the Jews to preserve and propagate to all of mankind the doctrine of a supreme, intelligent, wise, almighty sovereign of the universe, of the world, which I believe to be the great essential principle of all morality and consequently of all civilization. My friends, I'm reading to you, I'm sharing with you what the second United States president said in the 1800s, John Adams. They are the most glorious nation that ever inhabited this earth. The Romans and their empire were but a bauble or a bauble in comparison to the Jewish community. They have given religion to 3/4 of the globe and have influenced the affairs of mankind more and more happily than any other nation, ancient or modern. Again, having July 4th in mind, the language of the founding fathers came from the Torah, came from the Bible. 3 names for God are included in the Declaration of Independence. You find the word Creator, the word Judge, and Providence are unmistakably Jewish names for God. They don't come from the Greeks or the Romans. So as the world is becoming more and more uncivilized, it is time for us, to a sense, to be that model, to teach, to help, to be a guidance. The world looks up to you and to me. To be sure, it's not comfortable today to unapologetically and non-defensively, albeit with sensitivity and respectfulness, to stand for and publicly promote our values, our principles, and our definition. It's not easy. It's not simple to speak our truths, protect our sacred moral institutions, and resist conforming to the styles and the fads and the mores of our time. But I quote again from W.C. Fields, a good friend of Gene Brandiston. W.C. Fields once said, "Remember, a dead fish can float downstream, but it takes a live one to swim upstream." Abraham, the founding father of the Jewish people, was called Avraham Ha'ivri, meaning Me'ever, on the other side. When the whole world took one position and stood on one side, he had the courage to stand out, to remain true to the vision and the will of the Almighty, and to stand on the other side, even when it meant standing by himself. He was willing to go against the flow, to fulfill his mission, to fight for his truth. So, my friends, have this in mind. Let us appreciate what the United States, how it was founded, who founded it, what they said about the world, what they envisioned for this great country. So God bless America on this special few days here as we remember that, and let us all be proud of who we are and share goodness and kindness. May we merit a world of redemption and a world filled with good health and happiness. This is your host, Rabbi Perl, wishing you all the best. Thank you again.